Good afternoon, everybody. Eric Foster, co-founder of the Future Today and Tomorrow Super PAC here. Wanted to touch on three key things because this here, as we are on October 10th, 2025, we're in a very definitely damaging political state. And so actually, let me make it four quick things that I want to focus on. So I'm going to break them up. First thing that I want to say, and this is where we are as a super PAC, and what we've been doing is we've been working to encourage members of the Democratic and Independent members in the House and Senate who caucus with Democrats to stand firm and be against any continuing resolution as well as any fiscal year 2026 budget that not just beyond what you see in terms of the issues of healthcare, but also includes language that restricts and prevents the military invasion of Democratic majority voting municipalities and counties and states that eliminates the or restricts the ability of the Trump's MAGA dictatorship regime, the MDR, from having the ability to abuse Title X authority that defunds any efforts to abuse Title X authority in terms of responding to protests around ICE facilities. And then lastly, calls for the immediate withdrawal of troops, National Guard, or any or military deployments to Democratic majority voting communities in America, period. And also, you may want to include or consider the whole use of military force, the authorization for for use of military force, the AUMF that we declared after 9/11, because that's been abused and consistently gets abused. And right now it's being abused to conduct an illegal war in Venezuela and now touching into Colombia. But also, it further backs up their flawed interpretation of Title X, which is not valid. That's not the way that you would use Title X, period. So make it simple, make truth simple again. We're pushing for and advocating for members of the House and Senate on the Democratic and Independent sides to stand against any efforts to pass the budget, in addition to protecting health care, to also include taking out the funding for the Title X abuses that we're getting from the Trump regime, as well as the in the illegal invasion, military invasion of Democratic majority voting cities, counties, and states, stop all Title X funding for domestic troop deployment, prohibit federalization of state National Guards without governor's consent, and lastly, restore the education and local government funding that Trump stripped from the fiscal 2025 year budget. Stand on those two things, Democrats in Congress, please. All right. So the second thing that I want to talk on is in terms of the framework of how we are continuing to address what I believe is a flawed hope that somehow within Congress, the MAGA Congressional Subsidiary to the MAGA Dictatorship Regime in the White House will stand against or change or might raise up and find some backbone to say no to the policies that are coming from the MAGA dictatorship regime led by Donald Trump. I know people don't want to accept this, but my grandma Foster always said the words people say are important, but you also look at their actions. And regardless of what the MCS, members of Congress, the MAGA Congressional Subsidiary, says about Donald Trump, says about either behind the scenes or sometimes in committee hearings or every once in a while in a public forum, in an interview, they don't take any actions to oppose the things that he's doing. So, as my grandma Foster always said, when people's actions and words line up, but really their actions, that's a clear indication of what they believe and how they're going to function. And in this instance, those members of Congress who used to be Republicans, they're not Republicans anymore, and they're not going to change because this is the governance they want. They don't want any more of our constitutional republic and representative democracy form of government in which you actually lose elections, win elections, debate policy, find middle ground, and believe that people from the other side are not demonic, evil, hellscape people who shouldn't have the same rights, are godless, and are just satanic and evil. Well, when you see how they vote, when you see how they talk about Democratic voters, Democratic majority voting communities, Democratic elected officials who were chosen by the voters in their communities, it's nothing but hate, vitriol, and inciting language. There is minimal talk of respect of the other people in America, the non-MAGA people. So they're not going to change. So it's time to stop that. Forget all of that. This is what they want. This is what they believe in. And I just have had to come even to this consideration with the congressman that represents where I live, Tom Barrett, because while he hasn't been as publicly visible with demeaning, dehumanizing language about Democratic, independent, third party voters and non voters, when I called after the Trump post that he was calling for the indictment of individuals that he did not like, and I called my congressman to say, I would like you, as someone who's shown that you actually do consider people like me as equal Americans, just like you, to stand up and say something. And I got a nice email back from him basically saying, I appreciate your concerns. I don't agree with your concerns. And Donald Trump won the presidency. So this is what, quote unquote, Americans want him to do. First off, and we have to remember to continuously point this out, only 32% of the eligible citizen voting age adults in the United States voted for Donald Trump in 2024, period. 68% voted in splits of for Vice President Harris, for third party presidential candidates, down ballot for people like US House, state races, judicial races within their states, et cetera, and didn't vote for the president or didn't vote at all. That universe is 164,295,437 combined versus the 77,302,580 that Trump got. And within that 164,295,439 is the 75,017,613 who voted for Vice President Harris. To me, that was a clear indication that it doesn't matter if those of you who didn't vote for Trump have concerns that what he's doing is an infringement on your rights or your freedoms or people like you's rights and freedoms. I don't care because he won and I'm cool with what he's doing. So I say this to media, and I also say this to members of the Democratic Party. I say this to members of the Green Party. I say that to those who are elected independents, members of progressive parties at state levels. In Alaska, the Alaska Independence Party, which is part of the coalition government in the legislative body with Democrats and non-MAGA Republicans, to accept that those who have stood with the MAGA movement as elected officials are not doing it out of fear. And they're not doing it because they are scared of their voters or they're scared of Donald Trump. They agree with this. This is what they want. And this is the hill that they're willing to sacrifice themselves on. And they're not coming back. In a nutshell, like in a horror movie, when your friend Jimmy has been bit by a zombie, Jimmy's going to turn into a zombie. No matter how much hope you have that Jimmy doesn't turn into a zombie, Jimmy is going to be a zombie. So you got two choices. You can get away from Jimmy, you can take out Jimmy, or you could try to continue to believe that, well, maybe I can redeem Jimmy. Jimmy gone. Jimmy is a zombie, and Jimmy's going to bite your ass and turn you into a zombie. So you really only have two choices if you want to survive to the end of the movie. And I say that in the context, not of violence towards MAGA elected officials. So please don't get that twisted. But I say this in the context that these people have made a choice, and the best way for you to deal with that choice is accept that negotiation, conversation, cajoling, trying to convince is not going to work. So you have to work to vote them out. And separately, if you're in a governmental body with them, you have to work to oppose everything that they do, respond to every lie that they communicate, and put forward the truth in clear, direct, and strong terms, and don't back down. Bipartisanship is dead. Stop saying, well, we want to sit down at any time, any place with anybody. Stop trying to sit down with the zombies. The zombies don't want to sit down with you. They want to eat you and turn you into a zombie. These people will not negotiate with you in any sort of good faith, accept that, and work from the premise that you've got to get majorities opposite of them to be able to pass legislation. And that will include actual non MAGA Republicans, the few that exist at state levels. Governor Phil Scott in Vermont, I always cite as a non MAGA Republican. There's a few examples left, but that's what you have to do. You know, I also will put State Senator Matt Dolan down in Ohio is another one, but there's very few. So that's the next thing. All right. So the third thing that I wanted to touch on today is the dynamic of when dealing with the lies that come from the MAGA side, and when you're on media, in terms of anybody that's pro democracy and the reporters in traditional media, ask you the questions of, well, can you find compromise? And, why is this really happening? And the like, be clear and point these people back to true facts that take the MAGA dictatorship Republican, I mean, MAGA dictatorship regime, the MAGA Congressional Subsidiary, and the MAGA mainstream media exactly at their word with what they say and what they do. There is no subterfuge with what they're doing. They want to turn America into a dictatorship. They don't care about compromise. They don't care about hurting people who are non-MAGA people. They are penalizing states based on how the majority of people in that state voted because they didn't vote for MAGA. They're not trying to convince people to become MAGA. They're trying to threaten them through extortion, through invasion, and through other tactics to either get you to not vote or get you to surrender and become a unwilling participant. It's a creepy vibe that lends to predatory behavior, sexual predatory, other predatory behaviors, but it's a vibe with MAGA that there is not meeting in the middle and compromise. There's, I'm going to force our will on people. We don't care. Look at the Bad Bunny situation. Bad Bunny is one of the highest performing global global music artists around the world. He's up there with Taylor and others of that ilk. He is an American and he speaks clearly about the American experience as he has lived as a Hispanic man who stands with other Hispanic Americans and wants them to be treated the same as white Americans. MAGA hates that. So because he gets picked, the MAGA Dictatorship Regime, the MAGA Congressional Subsidiary, the MAGA mainstream media, and a lot of the MAGA voices and people are upset, saying that that's an affront to us. That clearly shows that they don't want culture or communications or presentation or media that includes non-MAGA voices. The only voices they believe should exist and need to exist are the voices that they believe are suitable. They're American voices. That's why MAGA Mike Johnson said Lee Greenwood. Now, for the non-MAGA majority, there's nothing in that you would want to see a Lee Greenwood with his one-hit wonder song as your Super Bowl halftime performer. But for them, they don't care what you want. Your voice doesn't matter. And I think it's time to once again accept that from the dynamic of economics, culture, and just basic living, if you're in the non-MAGA majority, your voice doesn't matter to the MAGA minority. The 32 wants to rule over the 68. That doesn't fly, but that's what we're facing. And so the sooner that we accept the reality of what we're dealing with, the sooner we're able to defeat these folks at the ballot box, use our economic strength as the non-MAGA majority to support and bolster non-MAGA companies to stand against the infiltration and the indoctrination and the dictatorship regimes of the MDR, and to buttress and protect and support opportunities, jobs, and other things to restore the lost, stolen economic stability and freedom that the MAGA forces are taking from us. They're stealing our house, our car, and our grandparents. So now I'm going to move to the last point. Okay. I'm doing this kind of purposely in terms of the pauses so that I can potentially break this up into 4 smaller videos. But the last part is who is the center? Now, we've had a lot of conversation about the center, if you will, and regarding, from a political dynamic, you've got to find ways to appeal to the center, and you've got to try to shift off some of the people that are in the MAGA voting universe to come back. there's always the conversation of in the 2024 election, what happened in terms of Vice President Harris and her 48% of the votes cast for president and 31% of the total eligible voters. Well, here's the reality. You don't have to appeal or shift your focus to try to get some of the MAGA universe voters back. Because once again, the pool is bigger on the non-MAGA majority side than it is the MAGA side. And just to give you a quick statistical reality, well, and I'm going to the numbers now, but going back to that 164,295,437 that includes, in terms of outside of the Vice President Harris voters, 2,918,109 who voted for third party candidates, 1,395,093 who voted for down ballot only and skipped the presidential part of the ballot, and 84,961,624 who didn't vote in the election. So you're talking about a combined 88 million additional voters that you can reach into as a pool to get to consider voting for the pro-democracy Democratic candidate versus trying to peel back pieces of the 77,302,580 who voted for Donald Trump and voted for the MAGA dictatorship regime. The total universe of eligible voters is 241,598,019. That's the total universe of eligible citizen voters in the United States. 68% didn't pick Trump by either voting for Vice President Harris, a third party candidate, down ballot and skipping the top of the ticket, or didn't vote at all. What I want to say is the 68% is the center. That is the center to the left. So it's the center, it's moderates, it's center left, it's progressives, it's liberals, and it's conservative Democrats, conservative independents, and non MAGA Republicans. That's the universe where state by state, both the Democratic Party and the pro democracy movement and the traditional mainstream media needs to be looking at. So instead of continuing to focus on how do we work just through the two pools of the 75,017,613 who voted for Vice President Harris and the 77,302,580 who voted for Donald Trump, you've got another 88 million combined that needs to be looked at, viewed from the vantage point of them being the actual center. Moving to the center is moving to get some of that 88 million into the Democratic pro democracy camp versus trying to peel back a Trump MAGA dictatorship regime voter. To me, that's the best use of resources, the best use of outreach. Think about it if you have a business and you're trying to reach customers. Well, if you're trying to reach people, you're McDonald's, I mean you're Burger King. So you're trying to reach people. Now McDonald's is number one. McDonald's has got 77 million customers. You got a universe of 241 million potential customers. Downers got their 77 million. You got about 75 million, but you're trying to reach and get into some of those McDonald's customers. And that's where everybody tells you your focus needs to be. There's 88 million other customers out here who might be going to Wendy's or Jack in the Box or Whataburger or other places, Hardee's, where the Hardee's still exists. They're not really here in Michigan. And Jack in the Box hasn't been in Michigan since I was a child. I remember the Jack in the Box in Oak Park that used to be off of Greenfield and 10 Mile, but that one left probably around 1976, 77, and we haven't had a Jack in the Box since. But you've got that bigger pool out there. So if I'm advising Burger King, I'm telling Burger King, try to get people from that pool because that's the bigger pool than trying to pull off a million or 2 million from that 77 million of the McDonald's customers. Those other customers, that 88 million, your competition for them is lesser. It's more regional. It's not as big as the universe that you are trying to pull from the McDonald's customers. So I say all that to say that's the game plan and we at the Future Today and Tomorrow Super PAC believe is the approach from a pro-democracy vantage point. How do we marry the 75 million, 17,613 who voted for Vice President Harris with the remaining 88 million who are third party, non voters, or down ballot only and skip the presidential part of the ballot? How do we combine and get that universe to go along and support the pro democracy candidate from the main party who actually is able to win a presidential election, who's actually able to win gubernatorial elections, who's actually able to win mayoral elections? That's where we should be focusing our energy on and building upon in the pro democracy camp. So that's my fourth one segment for today is the 68% is the real center of America. And if we're smart and if you're willing to support us at the Future PAC, the Future Today and Tomorrow Super PAC, we will get into the field to work to encourage and reach and engage that 88 million to fold in and work with the 75 million who voted for Vice President Harris and create a sustainable voting and economic majority that can stand against the MAGA dictatorship regime, the MAGA Congressional Subsidiary, and the MAGA mainstream media. That is the way to save this country for our children and our grandchildren. That is the way. So please visit www.futurepac.today. We actually have a campaign going on right now from a fundraising dynamic in regards to our efforts to encourage members of Congress on the Democratic side and a couple of independents to continue to stand against any of the budgets from the regime until you get those four additional asks that we're advocating for, in addition to and I just had that up. I was just looking at that. Good Lord. Well, yeah. Well, so that we can get the folks to, stand against what they are doing in terms of invading Democratic majority voting cities, the illegal application of Title 10, as well as the other efforts to federalize National Guard without governor's consent, and restoring all of the educational and local government funding that Trump's MAGA dictatorship regime has stripped from the 2025 fiscal year budget. And so I'll have that as links that go along with this video so that if you want to support us so that we can get in the field and do the activity, we need support. We need dollars to be able to invest. It takes a village. It takes all of us in this 68% majority, the real center of America, to be able to stand against the MAGA dictatorship regime, the MAGA Congressional Subsidiary, and the MAGA mainstream media. So please join us. Get into the fight with us. We need you to get in this. Thank you, and I'll see you on the other side.